Welcome everybody to the Umbrella Podcast. We are so happy today to have a wonderful guest. Today we have the complete and utter privilege to be talking to. I'm going to give you a proper good intro here. A gentleman who has been in some of my favorite movies like Best in Show and A Mighty Winds, who is voiced. I was looking at your filmography and everything, and the voice acting I wasn't aware of, but you've done so much. Some of the greatest characters of all time, like Alfred Pennyworth from Batman, which I loved. Under the Red Hood, which it said you did Alfred in. That was a great movie. Also Bilbo Baggins. You've also been on legendary TV shows like, man, your TV show filmography was crazy to read.
It's easier to read out what I haven't been in.
I was thinking that. I was like, okay, he hasn't been in maybe The Nanny. Or were you in The Nanny?
No.
Okay. He's been in everything but The Nanny. So there you go. No, but the Drew Carey Show, Friends, Modern Family, ER, Mad About You, Murder, She Wrote, and Monk, which my Nana, those are her two favorite shows of all time, Murder, She Wrote, and Monk. Like that Johnny Cash song says, I've been everywhere, man. He has been everywhere. He has done so many things in Hollywood. Now he has written a book about his career in the entertainment industry that has spanned 4 decades and been nothing short of phenomenal. The book is called Caught with My Pants Down, which is a fun title, and Other Tales from a Life in Hollywood. And it's available today, correct?
Yes, it is now available to order from your favorite bookstore online, which most people use Amazon, but there's lots of others. And and there's a bookstore in LA that is, if you want a signed copy, they will be offering that, called Chevalier's Books. Chevalier's Books. But
sounds fantastic. It's available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. And we will be talking to him about that and much more. Mr. Jim Piddock, welcome to the Umbrella Podcast. Thank you so much for being on, sir.
Thank you. And after that introduction, we're out of time, aren't we?
That was good.
I always like to give proper credit and proper due, make sure I'm enunciating and giving all of that. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Michael, go ahead, Michael.
All right. So we'd like to start off with a lighthearted question. If you could have a hangout session with any of the characters that you've portrayed, just to chill out, to talk, to do whatever, who would it be and why?
Wow. That is an interesting question. I've never been asked that before. I've been asked who I'd like to hang out with, live or dead people, celebrities. But that one, the characters I played, well, just in terms of what's listed on, the characters I played, we're talking in well over 120, I think. I would say possibly, I'm really racking my brains here because the character in Best in Show was quite close to me. So I get to hang out with me most of the time. I would say there's a character I played in, trying to think what it was. Gosh, you've really stumped me. I'm never usually lost for words on questions. I would think that probably the character maybe in The Haunting of Bly Manor, which was quite recent, because he was a priest, actually, a Catholic priest, but he was one of the more compassionate characters I've ever got to play. And priests get quite a bad rap now, Catholic priests particularly, and I think, having grown up as a Catholic, although I admit to being lapsed, I don't really adhere to any set religion. I confess to being spiritual, but since we're in the confessional, but not any specific religion. But I felt that was a very good, forceful character that I would like to. I don't know if he was the most interesting. I mean, I played a lot more interesting characters probably that would be fun to hang out with. But that is, gosh, that is an interesting question. I mean, the thing is, when you're acting, you know, one of the first tricks of acting is that you have to, whether you're playing a villain or not, you have to, or a boring person or whatever, you have to love that character because you are them. Unless they are a self-loathing character, in which case you have to play someone who's self-loathing, but you have to love playing someone who's self-loathing. So, so yeah, I think that is one of the first rules of acting, that a bad guy doesn't necessarily see himself as a bad guy. Yeah. Or if he does, it's kind of boring. So yeah, that would be my choice.
That's a good answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I always try to come up with at least one question that maybe you haven't, because I know in press, especially when you've got a book and everything, you have a million interviews. So I'm like, what has he never been asked before? So try to get something there.
No, you got me there. Totally got me.
Good. I'm glad. We mentioned at the top of the program that you have had 4 decades in the entertainment business. Is this always kind of where you saw yourself as a kid growing up in the going into the entertainment business? And how did you break into the entertainment business? So kind of 2 questions. Is this always how you saw yourself, and how did you break in?
Yeah, it's actually 4.5 decades now, 44 years I've been an actor. I didn't. I grew up in a very ordinary middle class, or upper middle class, you might say, family in England, where there was no connection whatsoever to show business. And I wanted to be a professional soccer player, or footballer, as we call it. And I realized by the age of about 14 that I was utterly useless in terms of being a professional. I had no hope whatsoever. I was good enough to, captain my school team and play at a reasonable level at university. But in terms of making a living out of it, I was smart enough to know by the age of 14 that wasn't going to happen. And so I was quite good academically. I was always in the A class, or the B at worst in certain subjects. But I was rather bored by academics and academic subjects. So I tried to find things that would interest me in school. I mean, I did things like Latin and Greek, which is nuts. And so I've never used them in my life and never intend to, because Greek isn't even modern Greek. It's old ancient Greek, so no one speaks that. So I did those, but so I auditioned for the school play a year earlier than I should have. I was 15. And to my surprise, I got cast. And I really enjoyed it, partly because in an all-boys boarding school, it was the only time you got to see any girls, because they had some girls in the cast from another school. And that was kind of fun. And then on the opening night, I remember standing in the wings at this age of 15, going, I've never felt so terrified in my life. I was absolutely paralyzed, but also as high as a kite on the adrenaline. The adrenaline was coursing through me. And I thought, I've never been this scared ever, but it's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It was a weird kind of paradoxical kind of moment where I just went, yes. And I'm assuming it's the adrenaline that was like a drug. It is a drug in your body. And then bizarrely, I did go to university because my dad wanted me to have a B plan. And that was great, because my B plan was becoming a writer. And I think university really helped me solidify that. I did a degree in English. And then it was only when I was at drama school that I really discovered, I had a vague knowledge that there was some connection, that my entire family on my father's side, going back generations before his, were all in show business. Wow. Really? My grandfather was in show business, my great-grandfather, his father. It was extraordinary. And all their relatives were in show business. They were either producers, actors, whatever. And so I found this whole family history that was like, I'm not the black sheep of the family. I'm not the odd one out, or I might still be, but I'm not, in a minority anymore. And that was really kind of extraordinary to find that it was literally in my blood. And I discovered that subsequently I found out a lot more about my family, and my grandfather had a vaudeville act with Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, wow.
And in their early days. And I talk about this in the book. It's actually a through line in the book, because he was offered a contract by Chaplin after Chaplin had left and gone to Hollywood and made it. And he was offered a contract to go to LA and make films. And he went to his father, my great grandfather, who was an actor and a singer, who said, there's no future in that film business. It's a passing fad. So this would have been what, the 1930s, maybe, I don't know. Earlier, probably, possibly the 20s. And so he never went. And then I kind of felt a romantic notion that when I did come to America, and it wasn't initially for more than just 3 months to direct a couple of plays, and I never went back. You still can't get rid of me. I found that it was a romantic notion somewhere in the back of my head of I'm picking up this loose thread that was left dangling a generation before. And then when I worked in the studios a few years after that, I worked in the studios that Chaplin built in LA. I worked twice there, and I again, it was kind of a very romantic moment, thinking, wow, this is where my grandfather could have been working 60 years before if he'd not made that decision. So it was a wonderful sort of through. And then the through line continues, because about 3 or 4 years ago, I was asked to MC a birthday party, 60th birthday party for a great friend of mine called Steve Brower in England. And it was a big event. He's one of the owners of the Crystal Palace Football Club, and he has the biggest wine importing business in Britain or in Europe. And he had this big, huge party at the Clapham Grand Theatre, which is a wonderful old theatre that used to be a music hall, vaudeville theatre, and is now mostly used for music. And he had these great UB40 played there, and he had these great comedians on. And he asked me to MC the whole evening. And the main reason he asked me was partly because I'm in show business, but the other main reason is a family reason, is that my grandfather and my great-grandfather and my great-uncle had all performed on that stage. So it had come full circle. So back in 20, whatever it was, I think it was 2018 or 19, I was then performing on the stage that those 3 generations back had performed on, which was remarkably moving, actually. I mean, not just romantic, it was very moving for me.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Going all the way back to really the first movie star that everybody still knows, with the silent movies, Charlie Chaplin, and going back to that. So thank you for that. Thank you for that story. Michael, you got the next question, sir?
Yeah. So you've done stage, movies, TV, voice work on video games and animation. How do all these mediums differ when you're doing them, and which is your truest passion?
Well, between acting and writing, everyone says, if someone held a gun to my head, which thankfully has never happened in my life, I would choose acting because it's so much easier. And it is my first love and the first thing I did. Writing did become a plan B to fill in the gaps between acting. And it became a very, very good one for me, particularly financially. So I'm very grateful to that. But the different medium, the first 6 years of my career were all theatre. I spent, I think, 3 years pretty much solidly on Broadway. And then I moved to LA almost cold because I wanted to do film and TV. And I think that was always my goal ultimately. My goal ultimately was just to work as an actor for a career. I saw no further than that. So all this stuff that happened to me and ending up on Broadway at a very young age was remarkable. And I'm so grateful for that. So the adjustment really to go from theater to television is, fairly obviously, it's much smaller. The acting is going to be much smaller. you're playing to a camera instead of a large theater. I mean, some of the theaters I was playing in New York were 2,000 seaters. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so you don't project. And there's a sort of hybrid with multi-camera sitcoms with a studio audience, which I did a lot of in my early days. And even then, though, I had to learn not to play to the studio audience and play more for the camera, because it's very tempting to do that. And it can be a bit big and a bit, bit over the top. So that was an adjustment. And then actually a big turning point for me was doing Best in Show, because that up till then I was sort of still playing comedy in terms of my theater roots. And I was often the funny guy and the kind of the crazy guy or the mad guy, or whatever. And then I got to play the straight man with Fred Willard. And I was jet lagged when we shot that film, because I'd flown 12 hours to do it and then had to fly all the way back to it. I was working in London at the time. And when I saw the film, I went, oh, it was a real eye opener, because I realized how you could do a different form of acting with a small a. And I became devoted then to being a non-actor in terms of just doing, rather than doing. And your face can do so much. You can do so much with so little. Your eyes can do it. And that was a great kind of learning thing for me. I've sometimes fallen off the wagon and given some grotesquely over the top performances since, but it was a real change. And then voiceover, film and TV basically are the same now. I mean, there's no real difference between acting. It's just the process is different of shooting it, but that's more behind the scenes. And voiceover is a very specific thing. I did my first ones in New York were just commercials. I was actually the first ever spokesman for Virgin Atlantic radio. Really? And then I did some Panasonic stuff and various other companies. And then I kind of progressed from that to doing animation, which is obviously much more like acting. The other's more like announcing. And that was a kind of another change altogether. And that was great because it's very focused. It's very, very, you channel that energy, just as in film acting and TV acting, you channel all the energy towards that camera screen. You channel all your energy into that microphone. So when you're in a recording booth with other actors, which rarely happens now, because you either do it at home or on your own, you see some people really quite animated. I mean, they're quite physical, but it's all being directed at the microphone. And there are geniuses out there. I mean, it's icing on the cake for me, voiceovers. I do some, and I have a limited range, and I can do certain voices and stuff, but there are people out there who are just extraordinary. And I look at them and marvel. I consider myself relatively versatile, but they're incredible. So I think that's a whole other thing, and that's you have to learn how to do that too, and obviously there's techniques so you don't pop, your P's don't pop on the thing, and various other tricks that you need to find.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that answer. So the next question we have is going back to, talking about Best in Show, Christopher Guest and everything like that. We're personally big fans. We mentioned before we started recording, my brother, I was going over to stay with him when he lived in a little town called George West, Texas. And he said, Jonathan, you have to see this movie, man. And I had not seen Spinal Tap. I had not seen Best in Show yet. And so he's like, you got to see this movie, A Mighty Wind. It's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, all right, well, let's pop it in, man. Let's watch it. And we might have watched it 2 or 3 times in that weekend alone. And then when I got home, I saw it for sale on DVD. And I immediately bought it, and I've watched it countless times. I absolutely love that movie, and you were great in that movie as Leonard Crabbe. The model train loving catheter salesman who's married to Catherine O'Hara's character Mickey after the breakup with Mitch. They come and they do the documentary years and years later. Your chemistry with Eugene Levy was hilarious, and your performance in Best in Show as Trevor Beckwith opposite the late Fred Willard, as you mentioned, as the announcer team for the Big Dog Show. Another unforgettable performance. Now, in these movies, along with, here comes a question, for your consideration and mascots, there's always been the story that these are a lot of times improvised. And tell us if that's true or not in a second. But also, after you tell us whether that's not true, talk about the experiences working with that amazing group of individuals a little bit further.
Yeah, I mean, we could fill an hour just talking about the Chris Guest stuff. It is the greatest improvisational troupe ever assembled, I believe, and that's not hyperbole. Here's how it works. When I joined the whole gang, it was for Best in Show. So I'm Waiting for Gaffman was Chris's first film. Actually, Rob Reiner directed Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
But Chris had created it with Harry and Michael McKean, Harry Shearer and Michael McKean. So I came on board. I knew Eugene Levy socially, and he'd and I'd met Chris, I think, a couple of times, just very briefly at parties and stuff. And I got a call out of the blue from Eugene saying, you know, we're doing this follow up to Guffman about a dog show, and we had this idea, or I pitched this idea to Chris that you would be kind of a good foil for Fred Willard because he's sort of this boorish, ugly American, you know, kind of bull in a china shop idiot, and you could be this kind of more, you know, polite, restrained, very knowledgeable about dogs, which his character, Fred's character, wasn't, and it would be a good kind of combo chemistry-wise. So I went in to meet them, and they're both, Eugene and Chris, are very socially, how do I say this? They're socially uncomfortable. So there was a lot of pauses. There was a lot of kind of empty spaces in this meeting when I was sitting on the couch and they're at their desks, and I found myself babbling just to fill the silences. And after about 10 minutes, I thought, I'm just really talking absolute nonsense at this point. So I got up and said, here, look, Chris, you don't know, Eugene knows my work a little bit. You don't. Here's a DVD of what I do and my reel, which is what we used to carry around in those days, DVDs. And then I drove home and I was thinking, how could I handle that meeting any better? It was awful. And the phone rang in the car, and I picked up, and this voice, very quiet voice, said, it was in his inimitable fashion, this deadpan, very quiet spoken voice, Chris Guest said, I just wanted to know if you would like to be in the movie. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. It'd be great, thanks. And there was a slight wrinkle after that because, as I said, I'd sold this series to the BBC, which I was not in, but I was writing and producing, with Mark Addy, Alex Jennings, and actually Hugh Bonville was in the pilot, but he couldn't do it because he was doing a film, unfortunately. And Lee Majors was in it, but believe it or not, the Lee Majors.
$1 Million Man, yeah.
Exactly. So I was doing that, and I thought, I can't do the film. I mean, they need me for 3 days in Vancouver. I'm in London. But luckily, the BBC were very cooperative, and Chris was fine with me just doing the 3 days there. So the BBC let me give my notes after the read-through of the table read of the sitcom on the Monday morning. I got on a plane, flew 11 and a half hours to Vancouver, had dinner with Fred, Eugene, and Chris. You know, roughly, they said, this is what we're going to do. And they sent me away for 10 minutes because they wanted Fred to tell them what he was intending to do, so I wouldn't know. And then I said, they said, we'll have the day off, Tuesday, which I was delighted because I was so jet lagged. And then got to Tuesday night and they said, well, we're still behind, so Wednesday you can have the day off as well. And then the same thing happened on Wednesday night, and they said, well, we can't do Thursday. And I said, well, we actually can, because I have to leave on Thursday night to go back to London to be there in time for the run through of my sitcom and the taping in the evening. So we shot everything from pre-dawn to post-dusk on that Thursday. And I mean, we're in the movie for the last 45 minutes of it. Sporadically through the whole 45 minutes, second half of the movie. And I have to believe that is the most amount of film that's ever been shot in one day. I mean, that's ended up in a movie. Has to be.
Yeah.
And it was just us in an empty stadium with a few extras behind us, so it looks like it's full. They'd shot all the dog stuff, so we're just commentating on footage that Chris showed us of what they'd shot on a screen, or he would say, and now the Hound group is coming in, and there's this character here, and here's Catherine O'Hara coming in, hobbling on one knee or whatever. So we would react, and then to circle back to your question about improvisation, what you have is Eugene and Chris wrote that script, and it was they're about 30-ish page outlines, solid pages. So they're not laid out like a normal script, which a normal script would be for a movie. It's about a minute a page, so it'd be about 90 to 100 pages. So it's a third of the length, but it's quite dense in describing how a scene unfolds. So each scene is there, and the journey of the scene, and some lines are suggested. This type of line, this, and some jokes are suggested. And then when I got to write with Chris later, we wrote Mascots and together, and Family Tree, the series for HBO. We actually did rather more detailed outlines. They were a bit longer, but it was the same concept. And some scenes are very, detailed, and some are less. And in Best in Show, pretty much all they said was the description of Fred's character, the description of my character, and that was it. And the kind of that I was kind of always trying to keep it on track. And they knew that Fred, they could let him loose. I mean, they knew that they had this rambunctious monkey who was driving the vehicle, blindfolded and probably drunk. I mean, not Fred himself, but I'm just giving a metaphor. Yeah. And I would have to sit and riding shotgun trying to control the vehicle. And that's what it was like. I mean, Fred was brilliant. I mean, he was the greatest comedy actor in terms of playing that type of character that I've ever come across. And it was a massive loss, his death. We've lost. He perfected that character in so many different ways, and he was the exact opposite off screen. Very serious, very quiet, very shy. But he played the American buffoon brilliantly. And I'd sort of seen him a couple of things, but I was like, oh my God, I'm jet lagged, and and I knew I wasn't going to compete with that. There's no point. And Chris didn't want me to. He said, look, your job is to just keep this real, be knowledgeable about dogs. And I'd read every night when I was doing the show in England, I went to bed and read a bit of this book called the American Kennel Club kind of compendium. It is the dullest, most fascist book about dogs you could ever read. They can't have a bone here because that makes them not this breed. It's eugenics gone mad. And so I had this idea that, and it sort of dawned on me as we was doing it, I'm going to be straight, but I can't try and compete because that would be stupid. But I knew enough about comedy to realize that the straight man can make the comedy man much funnier by being straight, and can double the amount of laughs. And if you're clever, you can get nearly as many, if not more, than the protagonist, in the dynamic, because the reactions are what as funny as the ridiculous things. So I tried to find a way to give that an arc. And so I begin being slightly amused, and you can see me trying not to laugh, but keeping the show on track. And people say, how did you keep a straight face? Well, I didn't. You can see it on screen, but it looks like my character is mildly amused, but he's got a job to do, so he's continuing. Yeah. I was continuing because I had a job to do, which was not start laughing completely and ruin the scene. So then I become slightly confused and bemused by the fact that he's this stupid. And then I become rather annoyed, and I'm hiding it all again, but you can see it. And then finally, at the very end, I get to completely, stab him in the back with, he makes some another ridiculous remark. And I say, yes, I remember you said that last year, which just completely, cuts him off. It's like, oh God, that's so damning. And I got my revenge. So that was a very interesting experience. And then, as I say, the next film was A Mighty Wind. And I got to be much more of the kind of guy who said the wrong things, and it flipped a bit. And I could be the boring man who was into model trains and has no sense of decorum about talking about scatological things because he's a catheter salesman in the wrong time at the wrong place. So I loved that because I love scatological humor, being British. And I have a speech that I actually quote in the book that I'm so proud of, talking about you know, the need is just why people suffer from incontinence and various, go into way too much detail over dinner with lunch with Catherine and Eugene's characters. It's supposed to be a polite lunch, and I just, they look absolutely appalled as I'm reeling off this thing about, you know, impacted fecal matter pressing on your bladder, you know, and all these sort of things. And Catherine's like, well, perhaps this is after dinner talk, you know, and and so I got to do the kind of the opposite. And that was a little bit more written in terms of the guidelines. But the idea is, when you write these, is to, if you can imagine, and the press always say it must be the easiest thing in the world, writing an improvised movie. But it takes longer. Yeah. It takes, I can guarantee it takes a lot longer than writing scripted ones. Because it's like, the best parallel I can give you is if you're an anal retentive and you're trying to plan a journey across the country, and it's across, say you're driving across America, and you have to detail everything you're going to do, where you're going to stop for gas, where you're going to stop to eat, where you're going to sleep, what the rating of the hotel is, who's going to be, you know, with you, what music you're going to play, what route you're going to take exactly, you know, Google Maps or whatever you choose. And so it's the whole journey is mapped out with this sort of anal retentive attention to detail. And then once you get to the day, you let the actors drive the car. So you've given them this blueprint, this very detailed outline. I suppose you could do a building parallel too. It's like an architect who's done every single thing, and then the contractor builds it. So that's how it works. And again, I mean, for the TV show, we were writing about 15-page outlines, 12 to 15, for what would normally be a 30-page script. So we were almost up to half, 50%. And part of it is so you don't go off track. You've got a story to tell and a movie to do. And if you just let people improvise from scene to scene, nothing's going to cut together. Yeah. It's all going to be, no one knows what anyone else has done. So this way, everyone has a mandate and they have a guideline, and then they can do whatever they like within that. And what's great about it is it sounds, the documentary style works brilliantly because it does sound like people are talking for real, which they are. They're talking like we are now. And people don't always speak completely, you know, fluently and cleanly. And that's what gives it that documentary feel. And often the first takes are the best because they are the freshest and the most original. And we shoot them, interestingly, if you are interested in the technical side of filming, in the opposite way. In a normal film or TV, you shoot the wide shot, the master shot first. Very little of that is used. It's just a cutaway now and again. And then you do the close-ups, sometimes a two-shot, and then the last is usually the solo shots. But with Chris, he would have 2 or 3 cameras running all the time and do the master last. So the first shots are the close-ups, and then you go the opposite way, because the thing that he'll use, that by the time you've got to do the master, you could literally be just reciting the alphabet or talking gobbledygook, because you're going to be using the soundtrack from the other stuff. So it's just to give you that wide perspective every so often. So it's a very different procedure. I hope that answered your question. It was a long answer.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it.
Okay.
So before we get to your book, you made a tweet yesterday about the charities the profits of your book are going towards. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I made a decision. Early on, I wanted, this is a labor of love, this book. I put my heart and soul into it, and it took me longer than anything I've taken to write. And thank God for the pandemic, or it would never have been written. So I may be the first person to say thank God for the pandemic in the history of the world. But it was a godsend for this particular project. And I felt like I didn't, you know, I'm not in a position where I need to make scads of money, which I'm very fortunate in. And I thought, well, I don't expect to make any money from this. It's not why I got into it. So I will give 25% of any profits I make to the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, BAFTA. They have a US kind of branch, and they've got a wonderful program called Access for All, which helps underprivileged kids express themselves creatively, and it gives them a kind of a passageway to enter the show business industry if that's what they wanted to do. It gives them a kind of guideline of how you might approach that. And then the other charity is a UK one connected to the football team that I'm very connected to, is Crystal Palace Football Club. They're a Premier League club. They have a marvelous foundation called Palace for Life, and it's totally separate from the club, but they, in terms of financially organized, but they do immense work with, again, South London is still not as wealthy as the rest of London, parts of it anyway. And they take kids that are at high risk for, joining gangs or getting into trouble, and through sport and football in particular, or soccer, as you might say, they help them, get on the straight and narrow, and have done some extraordinary work. And they're doing it every day of the week with young kids and also with special needs kids. They do immense stuff. It's very community oriented. So I thought that they would take 25% each. And then yesterday, I was getting so overwhelmed by every night talking about my book in a sort of frivolous, and it's a lighthearted book. It is no question a comedy book, basically, with a couple of very serious chapters thrown in, and some philosophy and a little bit of spiritual kind of reckoning at the end. So I found it incredibly painful watching the news of what's going on in Ukraine, and feeling so helpless, as we all do.
Yeah.
And I talked to my infinitely better half, Annie, who said, well, I said, my books just seem so irrelevant now and so small and unimportant. She said, not at all. She said, it's more important than ever, because people need to be entertained. They need an escape from that. We can't live with that 24/7. And we have to do whatever we can, but people more than ever want that. And so that made me feel a bit better. It still didn't make me feel completely better. And then I just woke up in the middle of the night, night before last, and went, I'm going to give the 50%, the rest of that, any profits, to a charity that will help Ukrainian refugees. And that, then I feel like I'm giving a little bit more. It's still not a lot, but it's, I don't know what else other than picking up, arms and going and signing up like the Spanish Civil War. But I think that's probably not very good, because I'm not, I've never fired I fired an air rifle, but I've never fired a gun in my life, and it's not my thing. So I think, and at my age, I'd probably be a liability. I'd probably shoot myself in the foot, or get caught with my pants down. So that's why I'm giving all the profits of the book to 3 different charities. And so please buy the book for that alone. Not me, I'm irrelevant. You will be entertained by it, I guarantee you. I really do. I think it's a very entertaining book, and I'm proud of it. And I don't say that boastfully, because there's very, very few things I've ever been in or written that I heartily recommend to people. I'm just like, if you want to go, great. If you like it, terrific. It's very rare, but this one I do feel very personally connected to, and I think it's a force for good in generally speaking, and it's entertaining and funny. So please do buy it for the charities and the other people, not me. And if you do buy it and you like it, very important thing is to write a review or give it 5 stars or 4 stars, whatever you want to give it, on Amazon, because that helps build momentum. And I shouldn't be plugging Amazon, but it is the go-to place to order books. And those things do help, and they will build the momentum, and it will eventually make more money for these causes. And the book now, the book tour, which was supposed to be all about me, is now becoming a fundraiser, which is fine. I'm very happy to have that kind of that focus shifted to that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Two of our best friends, myself and my brother, are Ukrainian immigrants from when they were about 10 or 12 years old. And, I've been talking back and forth to them, checking up on them as much as I can. And it's horrific for them and for everyone going through this. And so thank you for being setting an example in that way of really doing what you can, not only to help with the Ukraine and everything going on there, but with these two charities. I mean, it's an incredibly wonderful thing you're doing with the book. And we definitely want to talk more about the book, which is called Caught with My Pants Down and Other Tales from a Life in Hollywood. Once again, we want to ask you what sparked the idea for you to write a book and explain the process that you went through. My brother Michael, he's been writing books lately, and I know it's a very difficult, time-consuming. You said it's the most work you've ever put into anything in your life. So just take us through that process and the germ of the idea, the spark that caused you to want to write a book.
Well, it started, my first line in the book, in the introduction, is I wrote this book somewhat by accident. And it's a flippant line, but it's true. What happened was in I think it was 2017, I did an evening for the Screen Actors Guild in Beverly Hills. They had an evening called Inside the Industry, Let's Talk About It. And I was interviewed by a Wall Street Journal reporter for in this 200-seat theater for about an hour. And then there was a Q&A afterwards. And I didn't prepare anything, which I thought was a little bit of a risk, but I had an idea of some of the stories I wanted to tell and some anecdotes that I've kind of dined out on for a few years. And I knew I had enough of them to fill that hour. And I went on there and did that in a vaguely linear way. And he was very good at asking and pointing me in the right direction. And I really enjoyed it. And the audience seemed to love it. And it went on way longer than it was supposed to. And I came away thinking, I haven't done any theater for many years now. And I never really intended to do any more because I was sort of so busy in film and TV. But this could be really fun to do as a one-man show. Just me, sit down comedy, sitting down, standing up, walking around, talking to people, telling these stories with conclusions at the end of them. There's always some sort of, not moral necessarily, but something I learned from that or something I gleaned from it in terms of my life or life in general, the world. So there's usually a point to the stories, and sometimes there isn't. And I started writing that one-man show, and very quickly it was a 10-hour show, and I thought that would test the patience of any theater audience and my endurance. And not to mention the fact that at my age I need to go to the bathroom every hour or two. So I would be taking lots of intervals. So I then thought, well, maybe I'll do it as a book, and then I'll whittle the book down to an hour and a half and take that on tour sometime when I've got nothing else to do. So I just started scribbling down ideas, and then we got hit with this little thing called COVID, and that's when, certainly in California everything shut down, and certainly in the show business everything shut down for about a year, really. And I would have taken me 5 years to write, took me 5 months, the first draft. And then obviously you go through various rewriting phases and, having to sell the book and make sure someone wants to publish it. And so that was the genesis of how it came about. And I felt from the beginning, I didn't want this to be another memoir or autobiography for a number of reasons. And I say this in the introduction. If you did a random survey on the street and told people my name, maybe 1 in 10 would recognize my name. If you showed them a picture of me, even though I'm a sort of disguise actor in the sense that I usually look different in different parts, about 5 or 6 would probably go, oh yeah, I know that guy. And if you gave them a list of the things I've been in or written, 9 or probably 10 would say I've seen one of those.
Yeah.
So I'm in this weird kind of, I suppose you'd call it B-list category, or I've flown slightly under the radar. People in the business know who I am, and some people outside, and people recognize me if I've been in something recently. So, by the way, I don't go around conducting those surveys on the street, just so you know. That would be really, really bad. But I think it's true, and I am speculating. It's not a scientific survey, so please don't publish it anywhere. And my biography wouldn't really sell on my name alone, so it's got to be better than that. And I've cheated slightly because I've got 36 very famous people who have read the book and written lovely things about it. So I'm cheating by selling it on their name. And I was overwhelmed by that. That was shocked me that 3 dozen very well-known people here and in England, much better known than me, wrote such extraordinary dream things about the book. And most of them, I think, were genuine. I think most of them read it before they wrote it, which was delightful and really encouraging. So that helps. But I more in the writing process, I was determined that this would be a great read for anybody, whether they were in show business, cared about show business, ever had any interest whatsoever. They needn't. They might hate show business, and it's quite possible. And I still think they would find this book fun and funny and interesting. That was my aim. And so there's not a chapter. I think there are 38 chapters plus an introduction, plus a forward, or he calls it a foreplay by Eric Idle, the Monty Python legend.
Oh, yeah.
Foreplay by Eric Idle, who is one of my great friends. And I was ruthless about, whilst it's structured loosely around the kind of arc of my life and career chronologically, it nestled a good story in each chapter. And they're not long chapters. I mean, a couple are longer than others, but some of them are literally 2-3 pages. Then it was out. There had to be a good anecdote or a good story or a point to it that people could relate to or go, oh yeah. And what was lovely is that some people who aren't anything to do with show business said, I found it so relatable, because I do draw conclusions about what being a human being is and what life being on this planet is. We are here for a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things. And that was an interesting process, because what started out as a series of fun anecdotes became 3 other things. It became very clear after I finished it that what I was writing about was my own personal search for the meaning of family, which I think is important to everybody. And what that means and what my families are, plural now. And the second thing that came out of it, which I think is not an original thought whatsoever, but it's very, very clearly stated, and I think in a way that's very accessible, is that every single choice that we make in our lives, or I've certainly made in my life, let's put it that way, has had repercussions. And we make choices every second of every single day. The choices me doing this show, the choices of you picking me to do the show, the choices of what I tell you, the choices of anything, all have a value. It's like a stone being thrown into a pond. The ripples, you have no idea what they are. They may be small, they may be big. There may be people that hear this and are inspired to become an actor, or inspired to take risks, as I've done. And in the book, I make that very clear, that I'm not a risk taker in things of gambling or my own personal safety or stuff like that. But career-wise, I've taken enormous risks. And I think it's very important for people to live life to the fullest, which is the third conclusion I come to, is that the importance of those choices means that you have the best possible chance of living your life to the fullest. And the worst thing that any of us could get to do is to get to our deathbeds and go, oh my God, I wish I had done X, Y, or Z, or Z, as you say, Z, X, Y, or Z. That would be the worst thing. Or I got stuck doing, why did I do that for 30 years when I hated it? Why did I, have that person in my life for all this time? Whatever it is. And so I can't stress that highly enough. And this isn't a self-help book, and it's not a preachy book whatsoever. But the story did come to me with the voice of a dead great friend of mine. One morning when I was lying half asleep, half awake, I heard his voice in my head, and it was great actor Bill Paxton, and he'd passed away, 2 or 3 years before, a couple of years before. And I knew Bill fairly well. I wasn't like a super close friend, but we were close. And for some reason, his voice, I was hearing it in my head, and I was having this conversation with him. And for those of you that believe in such things, it was his spirit talking to me. For those of you that don't, it was my imagination, working overtime. And for those of you who are in neither of those camps, you think that if you're hearing voices in your head, you might need to seek mental health assistance. I don't know which of those is true. I wouldn't speculate. So I'll leave that for the reader. But I heard that the conclusions were very remarkable thoughts of clarity in this arena about choices and what time is, and how linear time and non-linear time. And they were thoughts that I wouldn't normally be going. I'm not a scientific person. So I wrote those down, some of those random thoughts at the end of the book, as a kind of where I've come to in the conclusion. So I found that it had a deeper undercurrent, the book, than I thought it was ever going to have. And that pleased me. That pleased me because it's nice to have a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of just a hint of a spiritual element, because the book is quite sort of down and dirty. I don't hold back. Mm-hmm. I'm very honest with myself, and I'm brutally honest with myself and with some other people. I only really eviscerate 4 people for bad behavior, one of whom is dead, so they can't sue me. And the other two of them are very well known, and one's pretty well known. And I do it with good humor, I hope, and explaining why I think that was unacceptable behavior. Whether you're a star or in show business or in any other field, you shouldn't behave like that. And I can do that now. I'm in my mid-60s, and I'm allowed to do that. I've earned that, and I do it on sets. I quietly take people aside if they're behaving badly, and say, just so you know, it's probably better to do it this way and not treat people that way.
Yeah. And
I think I've earned that. And if people don't want to work with me because of that, that's fine. I wouldn't want to work with them anyway. And I think that comes through strongly in the book, that it's not sour grapes or bitterness or just plain meanness. I believe that it's for the right reasons that I'm calling these people on the carpet. And by the way, I rehabilitate some people. Mm. There are people in there whose reputations are quite bad. And I have one chapter which is 10 A-listers I've worked with, and 9 I loved, and 1 was a 4-letter word that I have 4 asterisks. I leave it to the reader to fill in what they want the asterisk to be. And I one by one, I eliminate the good guys and say why they're good. And then I get to the person who it is. And by the way, it could have been, some are blatantly obvious, it probably wasn't, unless there's a curveball and you go, oh, actually that might be a shock, and we might be surprised, and one of them's Angela Lansbury, and someone actually thought it was her. So I do eliminate, and then I explain why that one person, I felt this way about them. So it's quite an entertaining book, and it's certainly gossipy, and it doesn't hold back. But I do rehabilitate some people's reputations in that chapter, because there are 4 or 5 people who most people would think would have been the answer, and they're not. And I found them to be delightful.
Right. You've sold me. I mean, I haven't got a chance to read the book yet, but I'm going to buy it on audiobook probably, and I'm getting it, man. The next question was kind of about the content of the book, but I think you haven't covered for the most part, but I did want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else about your book that you want the listeners of the show to know in order to prepare themselves for a glorious reading experience?
Well, one question you didn't ask me that has been asked is why the title? And it was not the title for a long while. And it's based on 3 incidents, one major one that has a whole chapter, where I have literally been caught with my pants down in my life. And pants, by the way, in the UK means underpants. And I mean in both senses of the word, not just trousers, which you call pants. I was caught 3 times. And someone I said this to, an interviewer said, boy, didn't you learn from the first time? and I clearly didn't. I didn't. One takes place on a train in the UK. One takes place in a medical office in LA. Oh, I knew it would happen. And one took place in the south of France, wow, on James Dyson's mega estate in Provence. And all 3 stories are in there, and they're highly amusing and at my expense. But I also felt the title was quite good because it's fun title, but it's also a metaphor for my story, really, of someone who's exposed himself his whole life and the book is exposing me. And it felt like the right title. I mean, as soon as I kind of stumbled on it, I went, yeah, no, that's it, because everyone's heard of, Tales from Hollywood or whatever. At one point, I think it was called Best in Show and Other Hollywood Animals. It was a sort of tribute to the Gerald Durrell books, My Family and Other Animals. But we ended up with this title, and I think the actor Diedrich Bader, who you may know from the Drew Carey show and recently American Housewife, he's a lovely actor and a friend of mine. He was one of the people that wrote a nice glowing review for the book, and he said that the story of how I got my pants caught down in England, he said, will cheer him up on his deathbed. He said, I will think of that story and die laughing, which was great. It was a great compliment. And I'm happy to say that we're doing a book opening at Chevalier's Books in LA next week, and Diedrich's going to interview me for the event. So it'll be fun. So that's I mean, I could talk for hours, but I think people, I would just ask you to please, if you want some light summer reading, which is why we're releasing it this time of year, not before Christmas, pick it up. It's not a long book. I mean, the book on tape, I mean, the audio book is about 8 hours, I think. It's a 300-page book. You'll whip through it. I mean, I've known people that have read it in 2 sittings. It's about, it's a normal length for a book, but it's a very easy read. It's not heavy at all, and it just flips along, I think. So please buy it, please review it kindly on Amazon, and just enjoy it. And all feedback is welcome. You can do it on my website, jimpiddock.com. You can do it. I'm on Twitter @RealJimPiddock. I'm on Instagram @JimPiddock. I'm on Facebook, and I might let you in there. It's a bit more of a closed shop, but I might do if you look pleasant enough and not going to be nasty. So yeah, all feedback is welcome, and I just hope that people enjoy it. That's all I wrote it for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving us all your time. You mentioned you got our last question as well, where people could find you. So that is where Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Jim Piddock. So that is a place that people can keep up with you. The book, your career has been it's been a blessing to us as far as just the entertainment aspect and all that you've added. It's been, I look back at fond memories. I just imagine you with the hat on, with the train set, with Eugene Levy in Crabtown, Crabtown in the winter and everything like that. That just it brings warm thoughts. And so anytime as human beings that we can get into each other's worlds in some way, shape, or form and give something positive, give something entertaining, give something that's really just an exciting boost in some way, shape, or form. And it's really needed now, like you said. And so it's been a tough couple of years. Some good things have come out of it. This book is one of them. I encourage everyone to, like Jim said, to go buy the book, take your mind off of things, relax. If you're driving in the car and listening to it on audio, we're warming up by the fire. Well, it's the summer, so maybe not the fireplace, but you're warming up by the box fan, the ceiling fan, and being able to read this book. That will be a wonderful boost to your life and your days. And so we really want to encourage, we're going to put all the links in this video as well, so people can just click on it and go straight to it. And we really appreciate it. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this is it for this edition of the Or Umbrella podcast. We will see you guys next time. Jim, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I hope that was all right for you.
Oh, it was fun, man. I got an email asking about it. I'm like, I could interview Jim Piddock. That's a thing that could happen. Like, really? Like, oh my goodness. I got so excited to hear that you were doing some press and that was an option that I could interview you. That was and then I texted my brother. He's like, you've got to be kidding me. And we just, it was a real pleasure. So, we do the show for fun and to talk to people that are interested in. So yeah, thank you so much, man.
The pleasure was mine. Thank you. It's interesting you say you watch Mighty Wind multiple times, because the one thing about Chris Guest movies is that they don't age.
No, they don't.
They don't age. I mean, but Best in Show is one that people normally say, they just say they watch it every Christmas or they watch it multiple times. I think For Your Consideration is probably the most esoteric and the least successful. But Mascots, Best in Show, Mighty Wind, Waiting for Guffman, and Spinal Tap, they are timeless. The jokes work, and because it's the detail, you see little things each time. And that's Chris, working with him as a writer as well as an actor, that's very important. There's always jokes in the background, in the scenery. I mean, the hotel in Best in Show, when Ed Begley's checking people in, the clocks are all saying exactly the same time all around the world. I mean, there's little things that you notice. And that's, we write those in and gives it the texture. And it's multi-textured, which is fantastic. And Mighty Wind, I think, has that. Absolutely.
It does.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we won't take up any more of your time, man. We'll be checking everything out, and thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Pleasure. Be well.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You too, sir.
All right. Very good, Jonathan.
All right. Let me call you real quick, okay?
You're still recording, by the way.